What kind of father looks at his newborn child and decides she is not worth keeping? What kind of sentence is this? She's deaf, we can't raise a damaged child. And how does someone say it without hesitation? And if you were standing there hearing those words about your own granddaughter, would you stay silent or would it stay with you forever? That day, in a cold hospital room, my son looked at me and said it like it was already done. Like nothing could be changed, like there was no place for emotion. We gave her up, he said, as if she was never meant to stay. And in that moment, something inside me changed. Because I knew if I walked away quietly, she would grow up believing she was unwanted and forgotten. But what my son did not understand was this. I was not walking away to forget. I was walking away with something in my heart that would not let me rest. And if this story already makes you feel something, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next is something no one expected. Do you know what hurts more than hearing something cruel? Realizing the person who said it meant every single word. Because I kept waiting even after he said it, I kept waiting for my son to take it back, to show even a flicker of doubt, a moment of hesitation, anything that told me he was still human in that moment. But he did not. He stood there, calm, almost relieved, like a burden had already been lifted from his life. And I remember looking at him and thinking, when did you become this person? When did my own son start believing that love has conditions, that a child has to be perfect to be worthy? The room felt smaller with every second, like the walls were closing in on me, and yet he spoke so casually, explaining it as if it was the only logical choice, as if keeping her would have ruined everything. And the more he talked, the more I realized something that terrified me. This was not a moment of panic or fear, this was a decision he had already made long before I ever walked into that room. Which means my granddaughter was never given a chance, not even for a second. And that thought stayed with me, pressing heavier on my chest with every breath, because if her own father could walk away so easily, then who in this world was going to stand up for her? And that is when a question began to echo in my mind, one that would not leave me alone. If I do nothing right now, will she spend her entire life believing that no one ever fought for her? And that question did not fade. It grew louder with every second I stood there, because something about the way he said it made it final, like a door had already been closed and locked. I looked at him again, searching for even the smallest crack in his certainty, but there was nothing, no regret, no guilt, just a quiet acceptance that terrified me more than anger ever could. And I started to realize something even more painful. This was not just about a child being given away. This was about a line being drawn between us, a line I could never uncross. Because how do you look at your own son the same way after hearing him erase his daughter from his life as if she never mattered? My hands felt cold, my thoughts scattered, but deep inside something was taking shape, something steady and unshakable. I could walk out and pretend this was not my fight. I could convince myself there was nothing I could do just like he wanted me to believe. Or I could accept the truth that was staring right at me, that if I turned my back now, I would be just as responsible for her silence as he was. And that is when a quiet decision settled inside me, not loud, not dramatic, but stronger than anything I had ever felt before, because I knew this was not over, not for me, not for her. And even though I had no idea where she would go, who would take her, or if I would ever see her again, one thought refused to leave my mind. I will not let her disappear without a trace. The moment I stepped out of that hospital room, the air felt different, heavier, like the world itself knew something had gone terribly wrong. I could still hear his words echoing in my mind, sharp and cold. She's deaf, we can't raise a damaged child, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not silence them. It was not just what he said, it was how easily he said it, how quickly he moved on as if a life had not just been pushed aside. And as I walked down that long hallway, I kept asking myself something I was afraid to answer. How many people already knew, and how many of them stayed quiet just like he expected me to? Because silence, I realized, was the only thing making this possible. Every step I took felt heavier, like I was walking away from something I might never get back. And that thought alone made my chest tighten. I stopped for a moment, trying to steady myself, but the truth would not let me rest. She was out there now, somewhere, already separated, already alone, already beginning a life without any of us. And the most terrifying part was not knowing where she would go or who would take her. It was knowing that she might grow up believing that no one even tried to stop it. That fear settled deep inside me, refusing to leave, because it was not just about losing her. It was about what that loss would turn into over time. And right there, In that quiet hallway, I realized something that changed everything. If I stayed silent now, then this would truly be the end of her story with us. I kept walking, but it no longer felt like I was just leaving a hospital. It felt like I was being pushed out of her life without even being given a chance to fight. And the more I thought about it, the more something inside me refused to accept it. How could a decision like this be so final, so absolute, as if a child could simply be erased because she did not meet someone's expectations? My mind kept replaying his voice, calm and certain, and that certainty began to feel like a challenge, like he believed no one would question him, no one would go against him. And for a moment, I almost gave in to that silence, that heavy feeling that tells you there is nothing you can do. But then another thought pushed through, stronger and harder to ignore. What if that is exactly what he is counting on? And I asked myself something that made my steps slow down. If I become one more person who says nothing, then how am I any different from him? That question stayed with me long after I left the building, long after the doors closed behind me, because it refused to let me find peace. I tried to tell myself there was nothing I could do, that everything had already been decided, that it was out of my hands. But the more I repeated that to myself, the less I believed it. Because deep down, I knew something was still possible, I just did not know what. And that uncertainty was frightening, because it meant stepping into something I could not control, something that could take years, something that might not even lead me back to her. But then another thought crept in, quiet but powerful. What if doing nothing is the only guaranteed way to lose her forever? And suddenly, the fear of trying felt smaller than the fear of regret. That was the moment everything began to shift. Not outside, but inside me. Because I realized I was no longer asking whether I could do something, I was asking how far I was willing to go. And the answer did not come easily. It came with doubt, with fear, with the weight of knowing that whatever I chose next would change everything. My relationship with my son, my own life, even the way I saw myself. Because once you decide to go against something like this, there is no going back to how things were before. And still, one thought kept rising above all the others, stronger each time. She did not choose this. She did not choose to be left behind. And if she had no choice, then maybe I did. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a future I could not accept. A little girl growing up somewhere, wondering why no one came for her, wondering what she had done wrong. And that question alone was enough to keep me awake, because I knew the answer: she had done nothing wrong. And yet she would carry that weight anyway, unless someone changed it. I sat there in the quiet, listening to the silence around me, and for the first time, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and certain. I was not going to let her story end like this. I did not know where to start. I did not know how long it would take. But I knew one thing: I would find her. But making a promise is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. Because the moment that decision settled in, reality followed right behind it. Questions I could not answer, paths I could not see, and a future that felt uncertain in every direction. Where would I even begin? Who would tell me where she went? And what if every door I knocked on stayed closed? The more I thought about it, the more impossible it started to feel. And yet, there was something deeper than that fear, something that refused to let me stop before I even tried. Because if I turned back now, then that promise would mean nothing. And I had already come too far to pretend this did not matter. That is when I realized something I had not thought about before. Finding her would not just be about searching, it would be about understanding her world. Because if she was out there, growing up, living a life without sound, then how would she ever hear me if I found her? How would she understand that someone had been looking for her all this time? That thought stopped me completely, because it showed me something I had been missing. This was not just a search for a person, it was a journey into a life I did not yet understand. And in that moment, a new question took hold. One that would change everything that came next. If I ever found her, would I even be able to reach her? That question stayed with me longer than I expected. Because it was no longer just about finding her. It was about what happens after finding her. I began to realize that even if I managed to trace her steps, even if I somehow reached the place where she ended up, there was still a gap I had not considered. A gap of silence, of communication, of understanding a world I had never lived in before. And that realization did something to me. It did not discourage me, it pushed me further. Because if I was going to do this, I could not do it halfway. I would have to learn everything I had ignored until now. And that thought led me to something unexpected. something that felt both overwhelming and necessary. I needed to learn how to reach her in her own language, not mine. The idea of learning something so unfamiliar felt strange at first, almost impossible. I had spent my entire life communicating in ways I never questioned, never thought about. But now, every assumption I had suddenly felt like a barrier between me and her. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. Love alone would not be enough if I could not express it in a way she could understand. That truth sat heavily in my mind, because it meant I was not just searching for her physically, I was also rebuilding myself emotionally and mentally. And somewhere inside that discomfort, a strange determination began to form. Slow but steady. Because if this was the only way to reach her, then I would learn it, no matter how long it took. But learning was not the hardest part. Admitting I needed to learn was, because it forced me to confront something uncomfortable, how much I had not known about her world from the very beginning. I started to question everything, the choices made without me, the decisions that took her away before I even had a chance to understand what was happening. And that questioning did not bring answers, it brought more weight, more responsibility, more urgency. Because now I was not just trying to undo a decision, I was trying to bridge a distance that had already grown too large. And still, I could not let go of one thought: if I stop now, then she remains lost forever in a world I never tried to enter. Days began to feel different after that, as if time itself had changed shape. Everything I did started to revolve around one silent purpose: finding her. But there was no direction, no guide, no clear path to follow, only fragments, memories, and unanswered questions. And in those quiet moments, I often wondered if she was somewhere right now, living a life completely separate from mine, unaware that someone was searching for her with everything they had. That thought was both painful and motivating, because it meant she was real, she was out there, and time was moving without me. And I knew I could not afford to stand still while her life kept moving forward without a trace of me in it. But the deeper I went into this search, the more I understood something I had not prepared myself for. The world does not wait for determination. It does not slow down for grief, or regret, or promises made in moments of pain. It keeps moving, and if you are not careful, it moves right past the very thing you are trying to save. That realization made everything feel more urgent, more fragile. Because I was no longer just fighting time, I was fighting disappearance. The kind that happens quietly, without warning, until one day there is nothing left to follow. And in that silence, I made another promise to myself: no matter how long it took, I would not let her story end in silence. It started with something so small I almost ignored it. A name mentioned in passing, a detail that did not seem important at first, but something about it made me stop. Because after so many dead ends, even the smallest thread felt like a lifeline I could not afford to overlook. I went back over everything I had heard, every conversation, every memory, every fragment of information that might have been dismissed too quickly. And the more I looked at it, the more I felt a strange pull, like this was not just another coincidence, it was different. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel fully: hope. But hope, I quickly learned, is not gentle. It shakes you, it makes you question everything, and it opens doors you are not sure you are ready to walk through. As I followed that small lead, every step felt heavier, because now there was something to lose again. Before, I was chasing uncertainty, but now I was chasing possibility. And that made everything more dangerous emotionally. I kept asking myself if I was imagining things, if I was letting desperation turn nothing into something. But then I would go back to the details again, and each time the feeling grew stronger, harder to ignore, and with it came fear, because what if I was right? What if I was finally close after all these years? That thought alone was enough to make my hands tremble, because closeness means truth, and truth changes everything. And then came the moment I could not turn away from anymore. A point where the trail was no longer just a thought, but something real enough to follow. I stood there with more questions than answers, realizing that I had crossed into something irreversible. Because once you start walking toward a truth you have been searching for, there is no way to go back to not knowing. And that terrified me more than anything else so far. Not because I was afraid of finding her, but because I was afraid of what finding her might mean. Would she recognize me? Would she forgive what she never experienced? Or would I arrive too late, carrying a love that no longer had a place to land? The closer I got, the more my mind began to fight against itself. One part of me was pulling forward, driven by years of searching, while the other part kept whispering warnings I could not ignore. What if I was wrong? What if I was chasing something that would only lead to more pain? But then I would think about her again, about that tiny life that was decided for without her voice ever being heard, and the doubt would turn into determination once more, because uncertainty was painful, but regret would be unbearable. And still there was something else growing inside me now, something I had not fully felt before. Fear. Not fear of the search, but fear of the moment it ends, because endings change everything, even when you are not ready for them. I began to notice how every small step forward came with a cost. Each piece of information I uncovered made the weight on my heart heavier, as if I was getting closer to something that would either heal me or break me completely. There was no middle ground anymore. And that realization made every decision feel delicate, like one wrong move could collapse everything I had been holding onto for years. But even in that tension, I could not stop. Something inside me refused to accept turning back now, because turning back would mean accepting that I had come this far for nothing, and I could not live with that thought. So I kept moving forward, even as fear and hope began to blend into something I could no longer separate. And then came the moment I had been both waiting for and avoiding at the same time. The point where there were no more excuses left. Only truth, waiting on the other side. My heart felt heavier than it had in years, because I knew that whatever I was about to discover would not just answer questions, it would change the meaning of every step I had taken so far. I stood still longer than I should have, trying to prepare myself for something that cannot be prepared for. Because no matter how strong you think you are, there is always a moment that tests you in ways you cannot predict. And as I took that final step forward, one thought kept repeating in my mind. After all this time, am I finally about to meet the life I could not save, or the life that no longer needs saving? When I finally saw her, everything inside me stopped at once. All the years, all the searching, all the sleepless nights collapsed into a single moment that felt too fragile to breathe through. She was there, living a life I had only imagined in fragments, and for a second I could not move, because nothing in my mind had prepared me for the reality of seeing her as more than a memory or a hope. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it might break the silence between us before I even had the chance to. And in that frozen moment, one question took over everything else. Would she see me as someone familiar, or just another stranger standing too close? I stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as if one wrong movement could undo everything. My throat felt tight, my thoughts scattered, but my eyes never left her. I tried to read something in her expression, a sign, a recognition, anything that told me I had not come too late. But silence surrounded us in a way I had never felt before. Not empty, but full of everything that had been left unsaid for years. And then I realized something painful, yet powerful. This moment was never going to be about what I say first. It was about whether she would even let me exist in her world at all. And then it happened. The moment I had feared and prayed for at the same time. Our eyes met in a way that felt heavier than words, carrying years of separation, confusion, and unanswered questions. I did not speak, because I understood now that words were not what she needed from me. Instead, I tried something I had spent years preparing for. Something that felt strange at first, but now felt like the only way forward. And in that silence, something shifted between us. Not loud, not sudden, but real enough to change everything I thought I knew about distance, love, and time itself. In that final moment, I understood something I had spent years trying to learn the hard way. That love is not measured by how fast you arrive, but by whether you refuse to stop coming. All the pain, all the searching, all the silence finally made sense in a way I could not explain, only feel. And as I stood there, I realized this was not just the end of a search. It was the beginning of something I had almost lost forever. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because here we share stories that remind us what it truly means to never give up on the people we love.